While working as a waiter in a fancy restaurant, he froze when he saw the millionaire client was his wife, declared dead 10 years ago. He walked toward her and... Michael Turner had always believed that some wounds never truly heal. They just learn to hide beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to tear open again. 10 years. That's how long it had been since the accident that ripped his world apart. Taking his wife Rachel and their 10-year-old daughter Emily in one devastating night. 10 years of carrying the weight of guilt like a stone in his chest. Knowing he should have been there. Knowing that if he hadn't stayed late at that goddamn client meeting, maybe things would have been different. He'd built a careful routine around his grief. Work at Morrison Associates where he managed mid-level accounts. His small apartment that still smelled faintly of the vanilla candles Rachel used to burn. And the occasional business dinner like tonight. Nothing too fancy. Nothing that reminded him of the dreams he and Rachel once shared about elegant restaurants and anniversary celebrations they'd never have. The Golden Pearl wasn't his choice. His client, Davidson, had insisted on the upscale downtown restaurant for their quarterly review. Michael felt out of place among the crystal chandeliers and leather-bound menus. But Davidson was paying, so he played along, discussing profit margins and market projections while picking at his salmon. "Turner, you're a million miles away," Davidson chuckled, cutting into his steak. "Everything all right?" Michael forced a smile, the kind he'd perfected over the years. "Sorry, just thinking about the Henderson account. You know how it is. That's what I like about you. Always focused on business." Davidson raised his wine glass. "Here's to another successful quarter." Michael lifted his water glass. He'd stopped drinking alcohol years ago. Couldn't stand how it made the memories sharper. When the restaurant's front door opened, letting in a gust of October air that carried the scent of expensive perfume and autumn leaves. That's when he saw her. The woman who walked in moved with a confidence that seemed to part the crowd around her. She was elegant in a way that money could buy. Tailored black dress, diamonds that caught the light just right, hair styled in a sophisticated updo that framed her face perfectly. She was older than the Rachel he remembered, more polished. But there was something about the way she tilted her head when she spoke to the maitre d', something about the curve of her neck. Michael's water glass slipped from his fingers, hitting the table with a sharp clink that made Davidson look up in concern. "Jesus, are you having a stroke or something? You look like you've seen a ghost." A ghost. That's exactly what it felt like. The woman was being led to a table across the restaurant, her arm linked through that of a distinguished man in his 50s. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of guy who probably owned half the city. Michael watched, transfixed, as she laughed at something the man said. That laugh, he'd heard it 1,000 times, had fallen asleep to the memory of it for years after the accident. Excuse me for a second," Michael mumbled, standing up so abruptly that his chair scraped against the floor. "Turner, what the hell?" But Michael was already moving, weaving between tables like a man possessed. His heart hammered against his ribs, and he could hear his own breathing, shallow and desperate. This was impossible. This was crazy. Rachel was dead. He'd identified the body himself, had stood at her graveside, had spent 10 years learning how to live with the hole she'd left behind. But as he got closer, every detail confirmed what his heart already knew. The small scar above her left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off her bike as a kid, the way she absently touched her earring when she was thinking, the exact shade of green in her eyes that had made him fall in love with her 15 years ago. He stopped at their table, his mouth dry as dust. The man looked up first, slightly annoyed at the interruption. But the woman's face went completely white. For just a second, he saw pure panic flash across her features before she composed herself with the skill of someone who'd had years of practice. "Rachel," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, calculating. Then she smiled, polite, distant, the way you'd smile at a stranger who'd mistaken you for someone else. "I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else," she said, her voice carrying just a hint of an accent he didn't remember. "I'm Victoria Hale." The man beside her, her husband apparently, cleared his throat. "Is there a problem here?" Michael felt like he was drowning. "Rachel, it's me, it's Michael. What? How are you?" "Sir." The woman, Victoria, she called herself, said firmly, "I really don't know who you think I am, but you're clearly mistaken. "This is my husband, Robert Hale." Robert Hale. Michael recognized the name. Real estate mogul. Owned half the commercial properties downtown. The kind of man who could afford to give a woman diamonds and designer dresses and anything else she might want. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave us alone," Robert said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "You're obviously confused." But Michael couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was seeing. Rachel, because it was Rachel, no matter what name she was using, watched him with those familiar green eyes, and for just a moment, he saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe even regret. "Please," she said softly, and that single word carried enough of the Rachel he remembered to nearly bring him to his knees. "Just, please go." A waiter appeared at Michael's elbow, polite but firm. "Sir, is everything all right here?" Michael looked around, suddenly aware that other diners were staring, that he was making a scene. Davidson was probably wondering where the hell he'd gone. Robert Hale looked like he was 2 seconds away from calling security. Michael's voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I thought, you look exactly like someone I used to know." "It happens," Victoria said, her composure perfect now. "I have one of those faces, I suppose." But her hands were shaking. Michael could see them trembling against the white tablecloth, and that small sign of her humanity. Her fear confirmed everything he needed to know. "Right," he managed. "My mistake." He turned and walked away on unsteady legs, feeling their eyes on his back. Davidson was standing by their table when he returned, money already on the table, clearly ready to leave. "What the hell was that about?" Davidson demanded as they walked toward the exit. "Nothing," Michael said, though his voice sounded strange even to his own ears. "Just thought I recognized someone." But as they reached the door, Michael couldn't resist one last look back. Rachel, Victoria, whatever she was calling herself now, was watching him leave. Even from across the restaurant, he could see the tears in her eyes. Outside, the October air hit him like a slap. Davidson was saying something about rescheduling their meeting, about hoping everything was okay, but Michael barely heard him. His wife was alive. His wife was alive, married to another man, living under another name, and she'd looked at him like he was a stranger. How was that possible? How do you fake your own death? How do you disappear so completely that even the man who loved you most believes you're gone forever? And Emily, dear God, if Rachel was alive, what about Emily? Michael stood on the sidewalk, watching the expensive cars drive past, feeling like his entire world had just shifted on its axis. Everything he'd believed, everything he'd grieved, everything he'd spent 10 years learning to accept, all of it was built on a lie. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He needed answers. He needed to know how this was possible. He needed to know what other lies his life had been built on. Michael didn't sleep that night. Hell, he didn't even try. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open, a cold cup of coffee growing colder by the hour, and Googled Victoria Hale, until his eyes burned from staring at the screen. The woman who claimed to be his dead wife had quite the digital footprint. Society pages from charity galas, business articles mentioning her husband's real estate empire, photographs from art gallery openings where she looked every inch the polished socialite. In every picture, she was radiant, confident, playing the role of Robert Hale's devoted wife to perfection. But it was her. Every angle, every expression, every subtle mannerism he'd memorized during their 8 years of marriage. The way she held her wine glass, fingers positioned just so, the tilt of her head when she listened to someone speaking, that small, practiced smile she used for cameras. It was Rachel, and she was very much alive. By 6 a.m., Michael had made a decision. He called in sick to work, something he hadn't done in 3 years, and drove across town to the offices of Blackwood Investigations. He'd found them online, a small firm that specialized in discreet inquiries for sensitive matters. Their website was professional but vague, which seemed about right for what he needed. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a knowing smile, led him to a cluttered office where a man named Jake Blackwood sat behind a desk covered in case files and empty coffee cups. "Mr. Turner," Blackwood said, gesturing to a chair, "tell me what's keeping you up at night." Michael had rehearsed this conversation during the drive over, but now that he was here, the words felt inadequate. I need you to investigate someone. A woman named Victoria Hale. I believe she's been living under a false identity." Blackwood raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation. What makes you think that?" "Because 10 years ago, she was my wife, Rachel Turner, and she died in a car accident. At least, that's what I thought until I saw her last night at the Golden Pearl." If Blackwood was surprised by this revelation, he didn't show it. He'd probably heard stranger things. "You're certain it was her?" "Completely certain." Michael pulled out his phone, showing Blackwood the few pictures he'd managed to find online. "This is Victoria Hale, and this..." He scrolled to an old photo of Rachel from before the accident. "This is my wife." Blackwood studied both images carefully. "The resemblance is remarkable. I'll give you that. But people can look alike, Mr. Turner. Are you sure you're not seeing what you want to see?" Michael had asked himself the same question 100 times during the sleepless night. "I know my wife. Every freckle, every expression. That's Rachel." "All right." Blackwood leaned back in his chair. "Let's say you're right. What exactly do you want me to find out?" "Everything. How she became Victoria Hale, where she's been for 10 years, and..." Michael's voice caught. "My daughter Emily was supposedly killed in the same accident. If Rachel is alive, I need to know about Emily too." Blackwood named his fee, more than Michael could comfortably afford. But he didn't care. He would have mortgaged his soul for answers at this point. "I'll need a few days," Blackwood said. "Don't do anything stupid in the meantime. Don't approach her. Don't stake out her house. Don't make her suspicious. If she's really been living under a false identity for 10 years, she's going to be paranoid about exposure." Michael agreed, though every fiber of his being wanted to drive straight to the Hale mansion and demand answers. Instead, he went home and waited, checking his phone every 10 minutes for updates that wouldn't come. 3 days felt like 3 years. When Blackwood finally called, his voice was grim. "We need to meet. My office. 1 hour." Michael made it there in 45 minutes, his palms sweating against the steering wheel. Blackwood was waiting with a thick manila folder and an expression that didn't bode well. "Sit down, Mr. Turner. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear." Michael sat, his heart hammering. "Did you find her?" "I found a lot more than that." Blackwood opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, newspaper clippings. Victoria Hale appeared in Robert Hale's life exactly 10 years and 2 months ago. Before that, there's no record of her existence. No birth certificate under that name, no school records, no employment history, nothing. So she is using a false identity. That's just the beginning. Blackwood pulled out a newspaper clipping. Robert Hale's first wife, Margaret, died 11 years ago from what was ruled a heart attack. She was 42, no history of heart problems. 6 months later, Robert meets the mysterious Victoria at a charity function, and they're married within a year. Michael stared at the photograph of Margaret Hale, a pleasant-looking woman with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes. "You think there's a connection?" "I think it's convenient timing." Blackwood pulled out more photographs. "But here's what's really going to shock you. I did some digging around the Hale estate, took some long-range photos." He slid a picture across the desk. "Meet Isabella Hale, age 20, Robert's stepdaughter." Michael's world tilted. The young woman in the photograph had Rachel's eyes and his own stubborn chin. She was taller now, more mature, but unmistakably his little girl, Emily, all grown up, walking across what looked like a college campus with books in her arms and confidence in her stride. "Emily," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She goes by Isabella now. Attends Boston University, studying psychology. By all accounts, she's brilliant. Popular? Well-adjusted? Robert Hale legally adopted her when he married Victoria." Michael couldn't tear his eyes away from the photograph. His daughter was alive, beautiful, thriving, but she'd been living a lie for 10 years, believing her real father was dead, just as much as he'd believed she was. "There's more," Blackwood continued, his voice gentle but relentless. "I did some background checking on the accident that supposedly killed your wife and daughter. The bodies were burned beyond recognition, identified through dental records. But here's the thing. The dental records for both victims were submitted by the same dentist's office, and that office burned down in a suspicious fire 2 weeks after the accident." Jesus Christ. Michael felt sick. "So, the bodies could have been anyone. 2 Jane does. identified as your family based on fraudulent dental records. It would have taken serious planning, serious money, and probably some help from people with connections. Michael stared at the evidence spread across Blackwood's desk. His wife had faked their deaths, stolen their daughter, and built a new life with a wealthy man. The woman he'd mourned for 10 years had been living in luxury while he struggled through every day missing her. Why? He asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Why would she do this to me? That's what you need to find out. But Mr. Turner, you need to be very careful here. If Victoria went to these lengths to disappear, she's not going to be happy about being found. And if something happened to Robert's first wife, Blackwood didn't need to finish the sentence. Michael understood the implication. What do I do now? That's up to you. You could go to the police, but proving identity fraud after 10 years won't be easy, especially without concrete evidence of how she did it. You could confront her directly, but that might drive her to run again, and you could lose Emily forever. Or, Blackwood paused, you could try to understand why she did this before you decide how to handle it. Michael gathered up the photographs, his hands shaking, Emily laughing with friends at college, Rachel, Victoria, at another charity gala, diamonds around her neck, the newspaper clipping about Margaret Hale's sudden death. I need to see her, he said finally. I need to talk to Rachel. I strongly advise against. I need answers. Michael stood, sliding the photos into his jacket pocket. 10 years of my life have been built on a lie. I need to know why. Blackwood sighed. If you're determined to do this, at least be smart about it. Don't approach her in public. Don't make her feel cornered. And for God's sake, don't go in there assuming she's still the woman you married. People change, Mr. Turner. Sometimes they change into something you don't recognize. Michael nodded, but he was barely listening. His wife was alive. His daughter was alive. Everything else, the how, the why, the what comes next, would have to sort itself out. He had a family to reclaim. Michael spent 2 days watching the Hale estate from his car, learning their routines like a detective working a case. Robert left every morning at 8:15 in a black Mercedes, returning around 6:30. Victoria, he still couldn't think of her as Rachel, had her own schedule: yoga at 10, lunch with friends, charity committee meetings, the kind of structured life that money could buy. Emily, Isabella, he corrected himself, came and went less predictably. College student hours, sleeping late, coming home at odd times with textbooks and that casual confidence that reminded him so much of Rachel at that age. He waited until Thursday afternoon when Robert's Mercedes pulled away and Emily's little BMW remained absent from the circular driveway. Only Victoria's white Lexus sat beneath the portico of the sprawling Tudor-style mansion that had probably cost more than Michael would make in a lifetime. His hands shook as he walked up the brick pathway, past manicured gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. The house was intimidating. All tall windows and ivy-covered walls that screamed old money and established power. This was the world Rachel had chosen over their modest suburban life. He rang the doorbell and heard footsteps approaching, light and familiar. When the door opened, there she was, and this time there was nowhere for either of them to hide. Victoria Hale wore cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Her hair was shorter now, styled in a way that made her look sophisticated and untouchable. But underneath the polish, underneath the expensive clothes and perfect makeup, she was still Rachel. "Hello, Victoria," he said quietly. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, calculation, and finally a kind of weary resignation. She glanced past him, checking to see if anyone was watching, then stepped back to let him in. "You shouldn't be here," she said, closing the door behind him. "But I am." Michael looked around the foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier. "Nice place. Very different from our little house on Maple Street. Michael, please." 10 years, Rachel." The name fell from his lips like an accusation. 10 years I've been mourning you. 10 years I've been visiting your grave, talking to a headstone that I now know is complete bullshit. She flinched at the word, wrapping her arms around herself. "It's complicated. Complicated." Michael's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. "You faked your own death. You faked our daughter's death. I identified bodies that weren't even you. How the hell is that just complicated?" "Keep your voice down," she hissed. Glancing toward the stairs, Isabella could come home anytime. Isabella. He shook his head. Is that what we're calling her now? Our daughter Emily, who thinks her real father is dead. Rachel, because she would always be Rachel to him, no matter what name she used, led him into a sitting room that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything was perfect, untouchable, the kind of room where real life wasn't allowed to intrude. Sit down, she said, taking a chair across from him. If you want answers, I'll give them to you, but you need to understand the situation I was in. Michael sat on the edge of an antique sofa that probably cost more than his car. I'm listening. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was dying, Michael. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors gave me 6 months. Maybe less. She looked up at him with those familiar green eyes, now filled with tears. That's why I was at the hospital so much that last year. Remember? All those routine appointments I kept making excuses for. Michael's mind raced back, remembering the fatigue she'd explained away as stress from Emily's school demands, the weight loss she'd attributed to a new diet, the way she'd sometimes catch her staring at Emily with such intensity, like she was trying to memorize every detail. You were sick, he said slowly. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew what you'd do. You'd quit your job to take care of me. You'd spend every penny we had on treatments that wouldn't work. You'd sacrifice everything, and in the end, you'd be left with nothing but debt and a 10-year-old daughter to raise alone. That was my choice to make. No, it wasn't. Her voice hardened. I was the one dying. It was my choice how to handle it. Michael felt like he was drowning. So you decided to fake our deaths instead. I decided to give Emily a future. Rachel stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the perfectly landscaped gardens. Do you know what it's like to know you're going to leave your child with nothing? We had $23,000 in savings, Michael. Our life insurance wouldn't have been enough to get Emily through college, let alone set her up for life. So you found a better option. She turned back to him. And for a moment he saw a flash of the woman he'd married. Desperate, frightened, but fiercely protective of their daughter. I met Robert at the oncology center. His first wife, Margaret, was receiving treatment there. She paused. She died 3 weeks before I was supposed to. The experimental treatment Robert was funding for Margaret. It became available to other patients after she passed. I qualified for the trial. She laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? The treatment that was supposed to save his wife ended up saving me instead. Michael tried to process what she was telling him. And Robert fell in love with a dying woman who reminded him of what he'd lost. When the treatment started working, when I started getting better, he proposed, said he couldn't bear to lose someone else he cared about. So you said yes. I said yes to giving Emily everything I could never provide. The best schools, the best opportunities. A father who could give her the world. Rachel's voice grew defensive. Look at her, Michael. Look at what she's become. She's brilliant, confident, successful. She's going to graduate from Boston University with honors. She has friends, opportunities, a future. She has a father. She has 2 fathers, Rachel shot back. Robert has been there for every important moment of her life for the past 10 years. He walked her to her first day at prep school, taught her to drive, helped her with college applications. He loves her like she's his own blood. Michael felt like he was being torn apart. What about me? What about the father who loved her first? The father who would have been left with crushing debt and no way to provide for her. Rachel's voice softened. Michael, I know this is painful. I know you feel betrayed, but I made the only choice that guaranteed Emily would have everything she deserved. By letting me think you were both dead. By giving you a clean break from a situation that would have destroyed you both. They stared at each other across the elegant room. 10 years of pain and anger and unanswered questions hanging between them. Michael could see that she believed what she was saying, that in her mind, she'd made the ultimate sacrifice for their daughter's future. But there was something else in her eyes, something she wasn't telling him. There's more, isn't there? He said quietly. Rachel's composure cracked slightly. Michael, what else, Rachel? What other secrets are you keeping? She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer when she finally spoke. Her voice was barely audible. "I know about Lauren." The name hit him like a sledgehammer. Lauren Matthews, his co-worker at the time. The woman he'd had an affair with during the last months of his marriage, when Rachel was distant and distracted, and he felt like he was losing her piece by piece. "I found the emails," Rachel continued. "The hotel receipts. The credit card charges for dinners I never ate. Jewelry I never received." Michael's mouth went dry. "Rachel, I was dying, and my husband was sleeping with another woman." Her voice was steady now, matter of fact. "So yes, I made sure our deaths would be clean, final. I made sure you'd never have to choose between your dying wife and your healthy mistress." The room felt like it was spinning. Everything he'd believed about that time, about Rachel's distance, about his own guilt. It was all connected in ways he'd never imagined. "I ended it with Lauren before the accident," he said weakly. "Did you?" Rachel tilted her head. "Or did the accident end it for you?" Michael couldn't answer because he wasn't sure himself. Lauren had been his escape from the weight of his failing marriage, from the sense that he was losing Rachel to something he couldn't understand or fight. If there had been no accident, no deaths, would he have chosen differently? "I loved you," he said finally. "I know," Rachel replied. But love wasn't enough anymore, was it? They sat in silence, the weight of 10 years pressing down on them. Outside, a car door slammed, and Rachel immediately tensed. "That's Isabella," she said, moving toward the window. "She's home early." Michael stood, his legs unsteady. "What now?" "Now you leave, and you think very carefully about whether you want to destroy the life your daughter has built for a chance to reclaim something that was broken long before I ever got sick." The front door opened, and Michael heard a young woman's voice calling out, "Mom, I'm home. Dad said he might be late for dinner." "Dad," Emily was calling Robert Hale. "Dad." Rachel looked at Michael with pleading eyes. "Please, just give me time to figure out how to handle this." Michael nodded. Though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to, Rachel led him through a side door that opened into the garden, away from where Emily would see him. As he walked back to his car, Michael's mind reeled with everything he'd learned. Rachel's illness, the experimental treatment, Robert's proposal, the affair with Lauren that had apparently driven the final wedge between them. But one thing bothered him more than anything else. When Rachel talked about Robert's first wife, Margaret, about how she died just before Rachel was supposed to, there had been something in her eyes. Something that looked almost like guilt. Michael sat in his car, staring at the Hale mansion, and wondered what other secrets were hidden behind those ivy-covered walls. Michael couldn't bring himself to go home after leaving the Hale estate. Instead, he drove aimlessly through the city, past familiar landmarks that now felt foreign, as if seeing them through someone else's eyes. Everything Rachel had told him churned in his mind like a storm he couldn't escape. She'd been dying. All those months when he thought she was pulling away from him, when he felt like he was losing her to some invisible force. She'd been fighting for her life in secret, and he'd been having an affair. The guilt was crushing, but underneath it was something else. A nagging sense that Rachel's story, true as it might be, wasn't complete. There had been moments during their conversation when her eyes shifted away from his, when her carefully composed mask slipped just enough to reveal something darker underneath. He found himself parked outside Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar where he and Rachel used to go when they were young and broke and stupid in love. It seemed fitting somehow, drinking to the memory of a marriage that had died long before he knew it was sick. 3 beers in, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Park. Come alone." Or Michael stared at the message, wondering what else she could possibly have to tell him. But he'd waited 10 years for answers. He could wait another day for the rest of them. The next afternoon found him sitting on a bench overlooking the river, watching joggers and dog walkers go about their normal lives while his own world continued to crumble. Rachel arrived exactly on time, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more like the woman he'd married, and less like the polished socialite she'd become. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting on the opposite end of the bench, maintaining careful distance between them. "Did I have a choice?" "You always have a choice, Michael. That's what I'm here to talk about." She pulled her sweater tighter around herself, though the October afternoon was mild. "I didn't tell you everything yesterday. I figured as much." She was quiet for a moment. watching a family of ducks paddle along the riverbank. The treatment worked, better than anyone expected. Within 6 months, I was in complete remission. The doctors called it a miracle. So you were cured. I was cured, but I was also in too deep. Her voice was barely audible. Robert had fallen in love with Victoria Hale, the woman who was supposed to die. He'd already legally adopted Emily, already started planning our future together. And Emily, she paused. Emily was thriving, Michael. For the first time in her life, she had stability, opportunities, everything I'd ever wanted for her. Michael felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. So you just decided to stay dead. I decided to honor the choice I'd made. Robert proposed to me knowing I might die, when I didn't. When the treatment worked, I couldn't just disappear from his life. He'd already lost one wife to cancer. How could I put him through that kind of abandonment again? What about abandoning me? Rachel finally looked at him, and he could see tears in her eyes. You'd already moved on, Michael. You had Lauren. Even if I'd survived the cancer, even if I'd beaten it, our marriage was over. We both knew it. The truth of that statement hit him harder than he'd expected. Their marriage had been dying long before Rachel got sick, killed by work stress and financial pressure, and the slow erosion of dreams deferred. The affair with Lauren had been a symptom, not the cause. But Emily didn't know any of that, he said. Emily thought I was dead. Emily thought you died in the same accident that took her mother. She grieved for both of us, and then she moved on to a life that was better than anything we could have given her together. Michael pulled out his phone, showing Rachel the photos Blackwood had taken. Look at her. Really look at her. She looks happy, successful, but she's built her entire life on a lie. Don't you think she deserves to know the truth? Rachel studied the pictures with the intensity of a mother who'd been watching her daughter from a distance for years. She's majoring in psychology. Did you know that? She wants to help people understand trauma, work through difficult family dynamics. She wrote her senior thesis on identity formation in adolescents who've experienced parental loss. The irony wasn't lost on Michael. She's studying herself without knowing it. She's brilliant. Her professors say she has real insight into human behavior, an almost intuitive understanding of what motivates people. Rachel handed the phone back. Robert's been talking about funding a clinic for her after she graduates, somewhere she can do research and help families. Families like the one she doesn't know she still has. They sat in silence, watching the river flow past. Finally, Rachel spoke again, her voice so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. There's something else. Something I haven't told you about Robert's first wife. Michael's stomach clenched. What about her? Margaret was getting better too. The same experimental treatment that saved me was working for her. Her doctors were optimistic, talking about remission, about a future. Rachel's hands were shaking now. But then she had a setback. Sudden organ failure. The doctors said it sometimes happened with aggressive cancers. That the body just gave up. But you don't think that's what happened. I think Margaret found out about Robert's feelings for me. I think she realized her husband had fallen in love with another patient while she was fighting for her life. Rachel's voice broke. She stopped taking her medications. Michael, she stopped fighting. The implications of what she was saying hit Michael like a physical blow. You think she killed herself? I think she couldn't live with the knowledge that her husband wanted someone else. So she made sure I could have the life she couldn't bear to live. Rachel was crying now, tears streaming down her face. Robert never knew. He thought it was just the cancer, just bad luck. But I knew. I've always known. Michael stared at her, trying to process this new layer of tragedy. So you married him out of guilt. I married him because Margaret's death gave me life, and Emily a future. It seemed like the least I could do was make sure her sacrifice meant something. Jesus. Rachel, do you hear yourself? You built your entire new life on someone else's death? I built our daughter's future on a chance that fate handed me. Was I supposed to refuse it? Let Emily grow up poor and fatherless when I had the opportunity to give her everything? Michael wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her that money wasn't everything. That Emily would have been fine with less. But looking at the photos of his daughter, confident, educated, clearly loved and provided for, he couldn't bring himself to say the words. What happens now? He asked finally. Now you decide what kind of father you want to be. The kind who destroys his daughter's happiness for his own peace of mind. or the kind who wants what's best for her regardless of the cost to himself. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Michael. But it's the situation we're in. Rachel stood up, brushing tears from her cheeks. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not even asking you to understand. I'm asking you to think about Emily, Isabella, and what would really serve her best. She started to walk away, then turned back. If you decide you need to tell her the truth, I won't stop you. But give me time to prepare her. Give me time to figure out how to explain 20 years of choices that led us here. Michael watched her go, feeling more confused and conflicted than ever. Part of him wanted to march straight to Emily's dorm room and tell her everything. But another part, the part that had seen how happy and successful she looked in those photographs, wondered if Rachel might be right. Maybe some truths were too destructive to share. Maybe some lies were kinder than the alternatives. But as he sat alone on the bench, watching the sun set over the river, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that there were still more secrets hiding in the shadows of Rachel's story. And until he knew all of them, he couldn't make any decisions about what kind of father he wanted to be, or what kind of man he'd already become. Michael spent the weekend in a haze of indecision, Rachel's words echoing in his mind like a broken record, every time he picked up his phone to call Emily's dorm. To drive to Boston and tell her everything, he thought about the life she'd built, the happiness she'd found. Was he being selfish, wanting his daughter back? Or was he being a coward for considering letting the lie continue? Monday morning brought an unexpected answer in the form of a knock at his apartment door. When he opened it, he found himself face to face with Lauren Matthews. Older now, her blonde hair shorter and streaked with silver, but unmistakably, the woman who had nearly destroyed his marriage 10 years ago. "Hello, Michael," she said, her voice carrying a confidence he didn't remember. "We need to talk." "Lauren?" His mouth felt dry. "What are you doing here? May I come in? What I have to tell you isn't something we should discuss in a hallway." Against his better judgment, he stepped aside. Lauren walked into his modest living room, taking in the sparse furniture and general air of a man who'd been living half a life for a decade. "You look good," she said, though they both knew it wasn't true. "I heard about what happened at the Golden Pearl. Small town. Word travels fast." Michael's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "I mean, several people saw you make a scene with Victoria Hale. People talk, Michael. They wonder why a man would mistake the wife of Robert Hale for his dead spouse." Lauren sat down on his couch without being invited. "But you didn't mistake her, did you? Because she's not really Victoria Hale." "I don't know what you're talking about." "She's Rachel Turner, your supposedly dead wife." Lauren opened her purse and pulled out a manila folder. "And I can prove it." Michael felt the world tilt again. "How could you possibly?" "Because I've been investigating her for 6 months. Lauren's voice was matter-of-fact, professional. "I'm a private investigator now, Michael. Have been for 8 years, and Victoria Hale has been my most interesting case to date." A private investigator. Michael tried to process this information. The Lauren he remembered had been a marketing coordinator, ambitious but hardly detective material. People change. Life has a way of pushing you toward what you're meant to do. She opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, medical records. "I was hired by Margaret Hale's sister, Catherine Morrison. She never believed Margaret's death was natural." Michael sat down heavily in his armchair. "What does Margaret Hale have to do with anything?" "Everything." Lauren pulled out a medical chart. Margaret was responding beautifully to treatment. Her oncologist was optimistic, talking about long-term remission. She had every reason to live, every reason to fight. Rachel said she had a setback, that her body just gave up. "Rachel told you that?" Lauren's eyebrows shot up. "Interesting, because according to the autopsy report that Catherine finally managed to get unsealed, Margaret didn't die from cancer complications." Michael's heart started pounding. "What did she die from?" "Digitalis poisoning, specifically, a massive overdose that caused fatal cardiac arrhythmia." Lauren pulled out another document. "Digitalis is a heart medication, but in large doses it's essentially untraceable poison. The symptoms mimic heart failure, which is why it took Margaret's family 3 years to get the medical examiner to look more closely." "You're saying she was murdered?" "I'm saying she was murdered by someone with access to her medical information. Someone who knew exactly what drug to use and how much would be fatal." Lauren leaned forward. "Someone like another cancer patient who had become friendly with Margaret's husband." Michael felt sick. That's impossible. Rachel wouldn't she? Lauren pulled out a photograph of Rachel and Robert at what looked like a hospital cafeteria. This was taken 2 weeks before Margaret's death. Your wife was quite friendly with Robert Hale, while his first wife was fighting for her life. The implications crashed over Michael like a wave. You think Rachel killed Margaret to get to Robert? I think Rachel saw an opportunity and took it. A wealthy man whose wife was dying, who was lonely and vulnerable and desperate to save someone. Lauren's voice was relentless. Margaret's death cleared the way for Rachel to become Victoria, to marry Robert, and to give Emily the life she wanted for her. Michael stared at the evidence spread across his coffee table. Medical records, photographs, timeline charts that laid out a methodical plan to steal another woman's life by ending it. This is insane, he said weakly. Rachel was dying herself. She was desperate to secure Emily's future before... Was she? Lauren interrupted. Because according to the medical records I managed to obtain, Rachel's prognosis was much better than she let you believe. Stage 3, not stage 4, 60% survival rate with treatment, not the death sentence she described. The room felt like it was spinning. That's not what she told me. Rachel has always been very good at telling people what they need to hear to get what she wants. Lauren's voice carried a bitter edge. Trust me, I should know. Michael looked at her sharply. What does that mean? It means our affair wasn't as random as you thought. Rachel knew about us from the beginning. Michael, she encouraged it. That's impossible. Is it? Think back. How did we first end up alone together? That conference in Chicago where Rachel suddenly couldn't go, where she insisted you take me instead. The late nights at the office when she would call and suggest I stay to help you with the Morrison account. Lauren's voice was steady, professional. Rachel wanted you to have an affair. She needed you to be the unfaithful husband so she could justify what she was planning to do. Michael's mind raced back to those final months of his marriage. Rachel's distant behavior, her insistence that he take work trips with Lauren, her surprising lack of jealousy when he came home late smelling like another woman's perfume. She set us up, he whispered. She set everything up. The affair gave her moral justification for disappearing. Margaret's death gave her the means, and Robert's grief gave her the opportunity. Lauren closed the folder. Your wife isn't the victim in this story, Michael. She's the architect. But Emily is an innocent pawn in her mother's game. Just like you were. Just like Robert is. Lauren stood up. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Michael looked at the evidence again, trying to reconcile the methodical killer Lauren was describing with the desperate, dying woman Rachel had claimed to be. What do you want from me? I want justice for Margaret Hale, and I want to make sure Rachel doesn't kill again. Lauren's voice was grim. Because she's not done, Michael. Robert Hale is worth $47 million. His will leaves everything to Victoria and Isabella. If something were to happen to him, a heart attack, a tragic accident, your ex-wife would be set for life. You think she's planning to kill Robert too? I think she's a woman who's gotten away with murder once and discovered how easy it can be when you have the right motivation and the right methods. Lauren headed toward the door. Catherine Morrison is preparing to take this evidence to the police, but it would be better if we had more proof. Someone on the inside who could help us catch Rachel in the act. You want me to spy on her? I want you to save Robert Hale's life. And maybe prevent your daughter from becoming an accessory to murder? Lauren paused at the door. Think about it, Michael. What kind of woman raises a child on blood money? What kind of mother builds her daughter's future on someone else's grave? After Lauren left, Michael sat in his apartment staring at the folder she'd left behind. Photographs of Rachel with Robert, medical records detailing Margaret's suspicious death, timeline charts that painted his ex-wife as a calculating killer. But underneath all the evidence was a more disturbing question. If Rachel had orchestrated everything, the affair, the fake deaths, the murder, what did that say about Emily? About the daughter he'd been so desperate to reclaim? How much of Rachel's ruthlessness had she passed on to their child? And how far would they both go to protect the life they'd built on lies and murder? Michael couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything but the folder Lauren had left behind. For 3 days, he pored over the evidence like a man trying to solve his own murder. Medical records that painted Rachel as a manipulative killer. Timeline charts that showed her methodically positioning herself to steal another woman's life. Photographs of her laughing with Robert while his first wife lay dying in a hospital bed. The woman in those pictures bore no resemblance to the Rachel he'd married. The woman who used to cry during sad movies and rescue stray cats. But then again, maybe he'd never really known her at all. On Thursday evening, his phone rang. It was Lauren, her voice tense and urgent. "Michael, we have a problem. Catherine Morrison is getting impatient. She wants to take what we have to the police tomorrow." That might not be such a bad thing. It would be a disaster. The evidence is mostly circumstantial. A good defense attorney would tear it apart, especially with Robert Hale's money backing them. Rachel would walk free, and then she'd disappear with Emily. You'd lose your daughter forever. Michael gripped the phone tighter. "So what do you suggest?" "We need more evidence. Something concrete that proves Rachel is planning to kill Robert." Lauren paused. "I've been watching the Hale estate. There's a charity fundraiser tomorrow night. One of those black tie affairs that Robert's crowd loves. Big event. Lots of people. Perfect cover for something to go wrong. You think she's going to do it there? I think if she's planning to make her move, a public event with hundreds of witnesses would be ideal. Heart attack at a stressful social function. Tragic but believable." Michael felt sick. "What do you want me to do?" "Get inside. You need to be there. Watching. Ready to intervene if necessary." Lauren's voice was matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the weather. "The event is at the Metropolitan Club. I can get you an invitation through one of my contacts. Rachel will see me. She'll know something's up. Maybe, but would she risk making a scene at such a public event? And if she does panic, if she acts suspicious in front of all those people, we'll have even more evidence of her guilt." Michael stared at his reflection in his bedroom mirror, trying to imagine himself in a tuxedo, infiltrating high society to catch his ex-wife in the act of murder. It sounded insane, but everything about his life had been insane since that night at the Golden Pearl. "There's something else," Lauren continued. "I did some digging into Emily's finances. Did you know she has a trust fund worth over $2 million? Money that came from Margaret Hale's estate. What does that mean? It means your daughter has been living off blood money for 10 years, whether she knows it or not. And if Robert dies, she stands to inherit even more." Lauren's voice was cold. "Think about that, Michael. Think about what it means for a 20-year-old to be financially motivated to keep her stepfather's murderer happy." The implication hit Michael like a punch to the gut. "You think Emily knows?" "I think Emily is smart enough to ask questions about where her comfortable life came from. And I think Rachel is manipulative enough to involve her daughter in her plans if necessary." Friday evening found Michael standing outside the Metropolitan Club in an ill-fitting tuxedo he'd rented that afternoon, watching Boston's elite arrive in their luxury cars and designer gowns. He felt like a fraud, but then again, half the people here were probably frauds too. The invitation Lauren had procured listed him as Martin Tucker, pharmaceutical consultant, close enough to his real background to be believable, different enough to avoid immediate recognition. He'd practiced the backstory during the cab ride over, but his palms were still sweating as he handed his invitation to the doorman. Inside, the club was exactly what he'd expected. All marble columns and crystal chandeliers, oil paintings of dead rich men staring down at their living counterparts. The fundraiser was for childhood cancer research, which struck Michael as particularly twisted given what Rachel had done to get here. He spotted her immediately, even across the crowded ballroom. She was radiant in a midnight blue gown that probably cost more than his monthly salary. Her hair swept up to show off diamond earrings that caught the light with every turn of her head. She moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who belonged, laughing at the right jokes, making small talk with the right people. Robert was beside her, looking every inch the proud husband, occasionally placing a protective hand on the small of her back. He seemed genuinely happy, completely unaware that the woman he adored might be planning his death. But it was Emily who took Michael's breath away. She stood near the bar, stunning in a simple black dress that made her look older than her 20 years. She was talking to a young man about her own age, gesturing animatedly about something that had them both laughing. She looked happy, confident, utterly at home in this world of wealth and privilege. This was his daughter, but she was also a stranger. He'd missed 10 years of her life, 10 years of watching her grow from a 10-year-old girl into this poised young woman. The loss hit him fresh, like a wound that hadn't properly healed. Michael positioned himself near a group of older men discussing market fluctuations, close enough to observe the Hale family without being obvious about it. He watched Rachel work the room, noting how she kept checking her watch, how her smile seemed strained despite her apparent ease. Around 9:30, Robert excused himself from a conversation with the event organizers and headed toward the bar. Michael watched Rachel's eyes follow her husband's movement, saw her check her purse before starting in the same direction. This was it. Whatever was going to happen, it was happening now. Michael moved through the crowd, trying to stay close without being detected. Robert ordered his usual. Michael had done his homework. A gin and tonic with extra lime. The bartender prepared the drink with professional efficiency, sliding it across the bar with a friendly smile. But before Robert could take it, Rachel appeared at his side, her own glass of wine in hand. "Darling, the Washingtons want to meet Emily. Would you mind bringing your drink? They're such generous donors. And you know how impressed they'll be with her plans for graduate school." Robert smiled indulgently. "Of course. Lead the way." Michael watched as they moved toward a well-dressed elderly couple near the silent auction tables. Rachel was carrying Robert's gin and tonic. He noticed, being careful not to let it out of her sight. He followed at a distance, positioning himself behind a display of auction items, vacation packages, and artwork donated by local galleries. From here, he could see the Washingtons, an elegant couple in their 70s who were clearly delighted to meet Emily. "This is our daughter Isabella," Rachel said warmly, her arm around Emily's shoulders. "The one I was telling you about, who's starting her graduate work in psychology next year." Emily launched into an enthusiastic description of her research interests. Something about trauma counseling and family dynamics. She was articulate, passionate, clearly brilliant. Michael felt a surge of pride that was immediately followed by guilt. Pride in a daughter he hadn't raised. Guilt for the years he'd missed. But he forced himself to focus on Rachel, who was still holding Robert's drink. She seemed to be waiting for something, watching the crowd with the alertness of a predator. Then Emily excused herself to use the restroom, and Rachel's posture changed subtly. She moved closer to Robert, who was deep in conversation with Mr. Washington about property investments. Michael saw her glance around quickly, then reach into her purse. She pulled out something small. It looked like a pill or capsule, and held it concealed in her palm. Michael's heart started racing. This was really happening. Lauren had been right. Rachel waited until Robert was distracted by a particularly animated point. Mr. Washington was making about downtown development, then moved the drink closer to herself. Michael saw her hand hover over the glass, saw her check one more time to make sure no one was watching. He had seconds to act if he called out, caused a scene. Would anyone believe him? Would they stop Rachel? Or would they just think he was a crazy man disrupting a charity function? But if he didn't act, if he let this happen, Robert Hale would be dead within the hour, and Rachel would have gotten away with murder again. Michael took a deep breath and stepped out from behind the auction display, moving quickly toward the group by the silent auction tables. Whatever happened next, he couldn't let another innocent person die for Rachel's ambitions. Even if it meant losing Emily forever, Michael was 3 steps away from Rachel when a hand touched his arm, stopping him cold. "Excuse me, are you Martin Tucker?" He turned to find Emily standing beside him, her green eyes, so much like Rachel's, so much like his own, studying his face with an intensity that made his breath catch. Yes, he managed, his mind racing. How did she know his fake name? "I thought so." Emily's smile was warm but knowing, and there was something in her expression that reminded him of Rachel at her most calculating. "I'm Isabella Hale. I believe you knew my father." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. My father, not Robert, not her stepfather, but her father, did she know? How could she possibly know? "I'm sorry. I think there's been some confusion." "No confusion." Emily's voice was quiet but firm. "You're Michael Turner, my real father, the one who supposedly died in a car accident 10 years ago along with my mother." Michael's legs nearly gave out. Around them, the charity gala continued. Laughter and conversation, the clink of crystal glasses, a string quartet playing softly in the corner, but all of it felt distant, unreal, as if he were watching it happen to someone else. "How?" he whispered. "I've known for 2 years," Emily said matter-of-factly. Since I started researching family medical history for a genetics class. Funny thing about death certificates. They're public record if you know where to look. And funeral home records are surprisingly detailed when you're persistent enough. Michael glanced toward Rachel, who was still hovering near Robert with his drink in her hand. She hadn't noticed them yet, too focused on her deadly plan. Emily, Isabella, we need to stop her from poisoning Robert. Emily's voice was calm, almost clinical. Yes, I know about that too. Michael stared at his daughter in shock. You know, I've suspected for months. Mom's been increasingly nervous lately, making phone calls she thinks I can't hear, researching heart medications online. Plus, there was the whole Margaret situation that never quite added up. Emily glanced toward her mother with an expression that was part love, part disappointment. I may have been 10 when she faked our deaths, but I'm 20 now. I notice things. Then why haven't you? Because I needed proof, and because I needed to understand why. Emily's eyes met his again. That's why I hired Lauren Matthews to investigate. She's very good, by the way, almost as thorough as I've been. Michael felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. You hired Lauren. 6 months ago, I found her name in Mom's old phone records. She was very careful about deleting most things, but not careful enough. It didn't take much research to figure out that Lauren Matthews was the woman my father was having an affair with 10 years ago. Emily's smile was sad. I needed to know the whole truth before I decided what to do about it. Jesus Christ, Michael breathed. How long have you known I was alive? I reached out to Lauren 3 months ago. She'd been investigating our family independently, which was convenient. We compared notes, shared evidence. Emily's voice was matter of fact, as if she were discussing a school project. I've been watching you, Dad, following your routine, learning about the life you've built since we died. You seem like a good man who got caught up in a very complicated situation. Michael's mind was reeling. His daughter, brilliant, poised, manipulative, just like her mother, had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. Why didn't you contact me directly? Because I needed to understand Mom's plan first. I needed to know how far she was willing to go to protect the life she'd built for us. Emily glanced toward Rachel again. Now I know. Across the room, Robert was laughing at something Mr. Washington had said, completely oblivious to the danger he was in. Rachel stood beside him, the poisoned drink still in her hand, waiting for the right moment to complete her murderous plan. We have to stop her, Michael said urgently. We will, but we have to be smart about it. Emily pulled out her phone, showing him a text message. I sent this to Lauren 20 minutes ago. She's positioned outside with Catherine Morrison and the police. They're waiting for my signal. Michael read the message. She's making her move. Give us 5 more minutes for evidence. You want to let her poison him. I want to catch her in the act so she can't deny it later. So Robert will finally see who he really married. And so the police will have undeniable proof. Emily's voice was steady, but Michael could see the pain in her eyes. This has to end tonight, Dad. I can't live with this secret anymore. They watched as Rachel moved closer to Robert, who was still engaged in conversation with the Washingtons. She had the drink positioned perfectly, the small capsule still concealed in her palm. Now, Emily whispered, and started walking toward her mother. Michael followed, his heart pounding. This was his daughter. Smart, strategic, willing to watch her own mother commit a crime to ensure justice was served. He should have been proud, but all he felt was a deep sadness for the childhood innocence Emily had lost, for the impossible position Rachel's choices had put her in. Mom, Emily called out as they approached the group. There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. Rachel turned, her face lighting up with genuine affection for her daughter. Isabella, darling, I was just telling the Washingtons about your research plans. Actually, I wanted to introduce you to someone. Emily gestured toward Michael. This is Martin Tucker. He's a pharmaceutical consultant I met at school. I thought he might be interested in your hobby. Rachel's eyes met Michael's, and all the color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked exactly like the woman who'd opened the door to him that first day. Shocked, terrified, caught in a web of lies she couldn't escape. We've met, Rachel said weakly. Have you? Emily's voice was innocent, but her eyes were sharp. How interesting, Mr. Tucker was just telling me about his expertise in cardiac medications. Apparently, he knows quite a lot about digitalis poisoning. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Rachel's hand tightened around Robert's drink, and Michael could see her mind working frantically, trying to figure out how much they knew. Digitalis? Robert looked confused. That's a heart medication, isn't it? In small doses, Emily said smoothly. But in larger amounts, it can cause fatal cardiac arrhythmia. The symptoms mimic natural heart failure, which makes it very difficult to detect unless you know what to look for. Rachel was backing away slowly, still holding the poisoned drink. Isabella, what are you... I'm talking about Margaret Hale's death, Mom, and about what you put in Robert's gin and tonic tonight. The accusation exploded across the small group like a bomb. Robert stared at his wife in shock. The Washingtons looked confused and alarmed, and other nearby guests began turning to see what was happening. That's ridiculous, Rachel said, but her voice was shaking. Isabella, you're making a scene. Am I? Emily stepped closer to her mother, her composure never wavering. Then drink it. What? Robert's gin and tonic. If there's nothing wrong with it, drink it yourself. Rachel's eyes darted around the growing circle of curious onlookers. She was trapped, and everyone could see it. The confident socialite was gone, replaced by a desperate woman who'd finally run out of lies. I don't understand what's happening here, Robert said, his voice growing louder. Victoria, what is she talking about? But Rachel couldn't answer. She was staring at Emily with a mixture of pride and horror, seeing perhaps for the first time how much her daughter had inherited from her. The intelligence, the strategic thinking, the ability to manipulate situations to achieve a desired outcome. Hello, Rachel, Michael said quietly. It's time to tell the truth. The glass slipped from Rachel's hand, shattering on the marble floor in a spray of gin and poison tonic water. Around them, the charity gala ground to a halt as guests turned to watch the drama unfolding near the silent auction tables. And in that moment, Michael realized that his daughter was nothing like the innocent girl he'd lost 10 years ago. Emily had become someone far more complex, far more dangerous, someone who could orchestrate the downfall of her own mother with the cold precision of a master chess player. The question was, what else was she capable of? The shattering glass seemed to echo through the ballroom, cutting through the gentle murmur of conversation and the soft strains of the string quartet. A circle of Boston's elite stood frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, unsure whether they were witnessing a family drama or something far more sinister. Rachel stared at the broken glass at her feet, the poisoned gin soaking into the marble floor. When she looked up, her face had transformed from panic to something harder, more calculating. Michael recognized that expression. It was the same look she'd worn during their worst fights, when she'd decided that the truth was less important than winning. This is absurd, she said, her voice growing stronger. Isabella, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not a game, Mom. Emily's voice cut through the growing murmur of the crowd. It's justice. Robert stepped forward, his face pale but his voice steady. Victoria, I need you to explain what's happening here. What did Isabella mean about Margaret? Rachel's eyes darted between her husband, her daughter, and Michael, like a cornered animal looking for an escape route. The crowd around them was growing larger, drawn by the drama unfolding in the middle of their elegant charity function. Robert, darling, there's been a misunderstanding. Has there? Emily pulled out her phone, holding it up so everyone could see. Because I have recordings, Mom, conversations between you and Dr. Harrison about obtaining digitalis, phone calls to that pharmacy in New Hampshire where you bought extra heart medication using a fake prescription. The color drained from Rachel's face. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting Robert and trying to understand how the mother I loved could become a murderer. Emily's voice cracked slightly, the first sign of emotion she'd shown. I kept hoping I was wrong. I kept hoping there was some explanation that would make sense of everything you've done. Michael watched this confrontation between mother and daughter with a mixture of pride and horror. Emily was brilliant, methodical, every bit as strategic as Rachel had ever been, but she was also 20 years old, and beneath her composed exterior, he could see the pain of a young woman who'd discovered that everything she believed about her family was built on lies and murder. Murder. Robert's voice rose above the crowd noise. What murder, Victoria? What are they talking about? Before Rachel could answer, Lauren appeared at the edge of the circle, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who had the unmistakable bearing of police detectives. "Mrs. Hale," one of the detectives said formally, "I'm Detective Morrison with the Boston Police. We'd like to ask you some questions about the death of Margaret Hale." The crowd erupted in whispers and gasps. This was no longer a private family matter. This was a public arrest at one of Boston's most prestigious charity events. Rachel looked around desperately, and for a moment, Michael thought she might run, but Emily stepped closer to her mother, blocking any path of escape. "It's over, Mom," Emily said quietly. "Just tell the truth. The truth." Rachel's voice turned bitter. "You want the truth, Isabella. The truth is that I did everything for you. Every choice I made, every sacrifice, every terrible thing I had to do. It was all to give you the life you deserved. I deserved to grow up with my real father." Emily shot back. "I deserved to know where I came from. I deserved to build my life on something other than blood money." "Blood money?" Rachel's laugh was harsh, desperate. "That blood money paid for your education, your clothes, your future. It gave you opportunities that Michael never could have provided." Michael stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "That wasn't your choice to make, Rachel. Emily was my daughter too." "Was she?" Rachel turned on him with fury that had been building for 10 years. "Where were you when she needed help with her homework? Where were you when she had nightmares? Where were you when she got her first period? When she needed someone to explain what was happening to her body? I was mourning you." Michael's voice carried across the ballroom. "I was grieving for the wife and daughter I thought I'd lost because you made me believe you were dead. You were sleeping with Lauren Matthews while I was dying of cancer." Rachel's composure finally cracked completely. "You want to talk about choices? You chose another woman over your dying wife." The accusations flew between them like weapons. 10 years of pain and anger and betrayal spilling out in front of Boston's social elite. Michael could see phones being raised, cameras recording what would undoubtedly become the scandal of the decade. But it was Robert who brought them back to the immediate crisis. "Stop," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying absolute authority. "Just stop." Everyone turned to look at him. This dignified man whose wife had apparently been planning to murder him, whose stepdaughter had been orchestrating a complex investigation, whose entire world was collapsing in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Victoria," he said, using the name he'd known her by for 10 years. "Did you kill Margaret?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Rachel stared at her husband, and Michael could see the exact moment when she realized that lies wouldn't save her anymore. "I loved you," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "I loved you, and she was dying anyway. And I thought if I could just help her along, just a little, then you wouldn't have to watch her suffer." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Robert's face went white as bone. "You killed my wife. I saved you from watching her waste away in agony," Rachel said desperately. "The cancer was going to take her anyway. I just made it quicker, more peaceful." "More peaceful." Robert's voice was rising now. "You poisoned her. I gave her rest." Rachel was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "And I gave you love again. I gave you a daughter who adores you. I gave you 10 years of happiness, built on murder," Emily said. Her voice steadied despite the tears in her eyes. 10 years of happiness built on murdering an innocent woman. Detective Morrison stepped forward, clearly ready to make an arrest. But Rachel wasn't finished. "And what about tonight?" Robert asked, his voice deadly quiet. "What was in my drink tonight, Victoria?" Rachel looked around the circle of faces. Her husband, her daughter, her first husband, the police, the crowd of society figures who'd been her friends and confidants for a decade. There was nowhere left to run, no more lies to tell. "Digitalis," she whispered. "Enough to stop your heart." The admission hit the crowd like a bomb. Even the detectives looked shocked at her straightforward confession. "Why?" Robert's voice broke on the word. "I loved you. I gave you everything. Why would you want to kill me?" "Because you were getting suspicious," Rachel said, her voice growing stronger again. "Because you started asking questions about Margaret's death after her sister began making noise. Because I could see it in your eyes when you looked at me. Doubt, suspicion, fear." She wiped tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand. I couldn't live with you looking at me like that. And Isabella deserves to inherit everything without having to share it with your biological children from your first marriage." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This wasn't just about love or jealousy or even greed. This was about ensuring that Emily, Isabella, would inherit Robert's entire fortune without any legal complications. "You were going to make me an orphan again," Emily said, her voice hollow. "You were going to kill the only father I've known for 10 years. Just like you killed Margaret. I was protecting our future." Rachel's voice rose to a shriek. "Everything I did was to protect you." But Emily was backing away from her mother now, shaking her head. "No, everything you did was to protect yourself. I was just your excuse." Detective Morrison moved forward with handcuffs, but before he could reach Rachel, she swayed on her feet, her face going pale. "I don't feel well," she mumbled, and then collapsed to the marble floor. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Emily knelt beside her mother, checking her pulse with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd studied medical procedures. "She's unconscious but breathing," Emily announced. "Her pulse is rapid but steady." Michael stared down at Rachel's still form, and a terrible suspicion crept into his mind. "Emily," he said quietly, "what exactly did you put in that drink before your mother dropped it?" His daughter looked up at him with eyes that were far too knowing for someone her age. "Insurance," she said simply. "I couldn't risk her actually killing Robert, so I made sure the drink was already neutralized. What she thought was poison was actually just a sedative." The crowd murmured in amazement, but Michael felt a chill run down his spine. His daughter hadn't just been investigating her mother. She'd been manipulating the entire situation, controlling every variable, ensuring that the outcome would be exactly what she wanted. Emily Turner was her mother's daughter in ways that went far beyond genetics. The elegant ballroom of the Metropolitan Club had transformed into something resembling a crime scene. Paramedics worked over Rachel's unconscious form, while Detective Morrison attempted to control the crowd of witnesses, all of whom seemed to be recording the spectacle on their phones. The charity fundraiser had become the scandal of the century, and everyone wanted their piece of it. Michael stood beside Emily, watching his ex-wife being loaded onto a stretcher. She was stirring now, mumbling incoherently as the sedative Emily had administered began to wear off. Soon she would be fully conscious, and then the real interrogation would begin. "How long have you known?" he asked his daughter quietly. "About Mom being a murderer, or about you being alive?" Emily's voice was steady, but Michael could see her hands shaking slightly. "I've suspected Mom killed Margaret for about a year. The timeline never made sense. And her stories about Margaret's final days kept changing. But I didn't have proof until Lauren helped me get access to the medical records." Robert stood nearby, looking like a man whose entire world had just collapsed. His wife of 10 years was a murderer who'd planned to kill him tonight. His beloved stepdaughter had been conducting a secret investigation into his family, and his dead first wife had been murdered by the woman he'd trusted to replace her, Mr. Hale. Detective Morrison approached Robert with the careful tone of someone dealing with a victim. "We're going to need you to come to the station to give a statement, and we'll need to examine everything Mrs. Hale had access to. Food, drinks, medications." Robert nodded numbly. "Of course, whatever you need." Emily stepped forward. "Detective, I have additional evidence you'll want to see. Phone recordings, financial records, medical documentation going back 2 years." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "You've been investigating this for 2 years. I've been trying to understand why my family's story never added up. Why there were no records of my father's death in the accident that supposedly killed us both. Why my mother's medical records from her cancer treatment were sealed, even though she'd supposedly died from the disease." Emily's voice was clinical, professional. "The more I dug, the more questions I found." Michael studied his daughter's face, seeing intelligence and determination that reminded him painfully of Rachel in her better moments. "When did you realize I was still alive?" "About 18 months ago. I found the original accident report, and the details didn't match what Mom had always told me. 2 bodies burned beyond recognition, identified only through dental records that were conveniently destroyed in a fire shortly after. It was too convenient, too clean." Emily glanced toward the stretcher where Rachel was being secured for transport. "Mom always said you died instantly, that you didn't suffer. But the report mentioned only one male victim, estimated age 65 to 70. You would have been 35 at the time." The crowd around them was thinning as security guards encouraged guests to leave, but Michael noticed that many were lingering, hoping to catch more of the drama. This story would be front-page news by morning. "Miss Hale," Detective Morrison said. "Or should I say Miss Turner? We're going to need you to come in as well. You're a key witness in what appears to be a complex fraud and murder case." "Of course." Emily pulled out her phone. "I have everything organized in files, financial records showing irregular money transfers from Margaret Hale's estate into accounts Mom controlled, phone records of calls to pharmacies in 3 different states, even security footage from the hospital during Margaret's final week." Michael felt a chill. Security footage. Mom visited Margaret every day during her final week, always bringing small gifts, flowers, books, homemade soup. Very touching, very caring, except the soup always came in the same type of container, and Mom was very careful to take the empty containers with her when she left. Emily's voice was matter-of-fact, but Michael could see the pain in her eyes. "It took me months to track down the security footage, but it's all there. A grieving woman caring for her future husband's dying wife, carefully administering poison with each act of kindness." Robert made a choking sound. "She brought Margaret soup every day for a week, said it was an old family recipe, something to keep her strength up during the treatments." "It wasn't soup," Emily said gently. "It was digitalis mixed with chicken broth, enough to gradually weaken Margaret's heart without causing immediate suspicion. By the time the final dose killed her, the earlier poisoning just looked like the natural progression of her illness. The paramedics were ready to transport Rachel to the hospital, but Detective Morrison signaled them to wait. Rachel's eyes were open now, and she was looking around with growing awareness of her situation. "Mrs. Hale," Morrison said formally, "you're under arrest for the murder of Margaret Hale and the attempted murder of Robert Hale. You have the right to remain silent." Rachel's eyes found Emily first, then Michael, then Robert. "Isabella," she said weakly, "you don't understand what you've done." "I understand perfectly, Mom." Emily knelt beside the stretcher. "I understand that you killed an innocent woman to steal her life. I understand that you faked our deaths to cover up your affair and your crimes. And I understand that you were planning to make me an orphan again to protect your secrets. I did everything for you." Rachel's voice was getting stronger, more desperate. "Everything I sacrificed, every choice I made, it was all to give you the best possible life. You gave me a life built on lies and murder," Emily replied. "You made me complicit in crimes I didn't even know were happening. Do you have any idea what it's like to discover that everything you believed about yourself, about your family, about your entire existence, was a carefully constructed fraud?" Rachel tried to sit up on the stretcher, but the restraints held her in place. "You have everything now, Isabella. The best education, the best connections, a trust fund that will set you up for life. You're going to be a doctor, a researcher, someone who helps people. Isn't that worth something?" "Not if it's paid for with blood money," Emily said firmly. "Not if it cost Margaret Hale her life and nearly cost Robert his." Robert stepped forward, his face a mask of pain and betrayal. "Victoria, I loved you. I grieved with you when you told me about losing your first husband and daughter. I opened my heart to you, opened my home to Isabella. How could you build our entire marriage on such monstrous lies?" Rachel's face crumpled. "Because I loved you too. From the moment I met you at the hospital, sitting beside Margaret's bed, reading to her even though she was unconscious most of the time. You were so devoted, so caring. I knew you were the kind of man who would love Emily the way she deserved to be loved. So you killed my wife to get to me." "I gave Margaret peace," Rachel insisted. "She was suffering, Robert. The cancer was eating her alive, and the treatments weren't working anymore. I helped her find rest." "You helped yourself to her husband and her money," Emily said coldly. "And you would have killed him too when it became convenient." The paramedics were getting restless, and Detective Morrison nodded for them to proceed. As they began wheeling Rachel toward the exit, she called out desperately, "Michael, Michael, tell her. Tell Isabella that what we had was real. Tell her that I loved you, that I loved her, that everything I did came from love." Michael walked alongside the stretcher, looking down at the woman who had been his wife, the mother of his child, the architect of 10 years of lies. "I will tell her that you loved us," he said quietly. But I'll also tell her that love without truth is just another kind of poison. And I'll make sure she knows that real love doesn't require murder to survive." Rachel's eyes filled with tears as the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. "Take care of her," she whispered. "Take care of our daughter." "Our daughter took care of herself," Michael replied. "She's stronger than both of us, and smarter than either of us deserved." As the ambulance pulled away, Michael found himself standing with Emily and Robert in the empty parking lot of the Metropolitan Club. 3 people whose lives had been shattered and rebuilt by Rachel's machinations, trying to figure out how to move forward from the wreckage. "What happens now?" Robert asked, his voice hollow. Emily looked between the 2 men who had both served as her father in different ways. "Now we figure out how to be a family without the lies, how to build something real on the foundation of all this truth." Michael studied his daughter's face in the streetlight, seeing maturity and wisdom that should have taken decades to develop. Rachel's choices had stolen Emily's childhood, but they had also forged her into someone remarkable, someone capable of seeking justice even when it meant destroying the only mother she'd ever known. "Are you ready for that?" he asked her. Emily smiled for the first time that evening, and in that smile, Michael saw glimpses of the little girl he'd lost and the incredible woman she'd become. "I've been ready for 2 years, she said. "I've just been waiting for you to catch up." 1 year later, the Massachusetts Correctional Institution for Women was nothing like the elegant world Rachel had inhabited for 10 years. Gray concrete walls, fluorescent lighting, and the constant echo of footsteps on linoleum floors created an atmosphere of institutional bleakness that seemed designed to strip away any pretense of the life she'd once lived. Michael sat across from his ex-wife in the visiting room, noting how much she'd changed in the year since her conviction. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray. She no longer bothered to cover. The expensive clothes and jewelry were gone, replaced by standard prison uniforms that made her look smaller, more fragile. But her eyes were different too, clearer somehow, as if the weight of carrying so many lies for so long had finally been lifted. "You look good," she said, managing a smile. "Healthier than I've seen you in years." Michael nodded. It was true. The past year had been difficult in many ways, but it had also brought a kind of peace he hadn't experienced since before Rachel's supposed death. "I've been sleeping better. Amazing what the truth can do for insomnia." And Emily, how is she adjusting? She prefers Emily now. Actually, dropped the Isabella completely after the trial. Michael pulled out his phone, showing Rachel recent photos. She's doing well, better than well actually. She finished her senior year with highest honors, got accepted to Harvard Medical School for next fall. Rachel's face lit up with genuine pride. Medical school. She's going to be a doctor. A psychiatrist, specifically. She wants to specialize in family trauma therapy. Michael paused. She says she wants to help other families heal from the kind of secrets that nearly destroyed ours. That's very like her, always trying to fix things, even when they seem broken beyond repair. Rachel studied the photos with the hungry intensity of a mother who'd been separated from her child. Is she happy? Michael considered the question carefully. Emily's adjustment hadn't been easy, learning to navigate relationships with both her biological father and the stepfather who'd raised her, dealing with the media attention from the trial, processing the reality of her mother's crimes. But she'd approached it all with the same methodical intelligence she'd used to expose Rachel's secrets. She's finding her way, he said finally. It's complicated, having 2 fathers, but she's making it work. Robert and I have become, well, I guess you'd call us partners. Partners. Business partners, actually. Turns out he needed someone to help manage his investments after all the legal complications from Margaret's estate. And I needed work that paid better than my old job. Michael smiled slightly. Emily suggested it, said we both love her, so we might as well figure out how to work together. Rachel laughed, and for a moment she sounded like the woman he'd married 20 years ago. She always was good at managing people. I suppose she gets that from me. Among other things, Michael's voice was gentle but firm. She also got your intelligence, your determination, and your ability to see 10 steps ahead of everyone else. The difference is, she's chosen to use those gifts to help people instead of manipulating them. They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the low murmur of other conversations around them. The visiting room was full of families trying to maintain connections across the divide of incarceration. wives visiting husbands, children visiting parents, all of them navigating the complex emotions of loving someone who'd made terrible choices. "I know you probably don't want to hear this," Rachel said quietly, "but I need you to know that I loved you, both of you. Everything I did, every choice I made, it came from wanting to protect the people I cared about most." Michael nodded. He'd spent months in therapy working through his anger about Rachel's betrayal, and he'd come to understand that love and manipulation weren't mutually exclusive. Rachel had loved them, in her own twisted way. The problem was that her love had been possessive, controlling, willing to destroy others to protect what she saw as hers. "I know you loved us," he said, "but love without respect, without honesty, without trust, that's not really love at all. That's just obsession dressed up in prettier clothes." "You're right." Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. "I see that now. Too late, but I see it. It's not too late for Emily. She still needs her mother. Rachel, not the woman who lied and killed and manipulated, but the mother who read her bedtime stories and helped her with homework and taught her to ride a bike." Michael leaned forward. "She visits you because she loves you, but she also needs to know that you understand the difference between love and control." Rachel nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "I'm in therapy too, you know, court-ordered, but it's helping. I'm learning about why I thought I had the right to make life and death decisions for other people, why I thought I could control everything and everyone around me. That's good. Emily will be glad to hear that. Will you tell her something for me?" Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Tell her that I'm proud of the woman she's become. Tell her that watching her choose justice over loyalty, truth over comfort, that took more courage than anything I ever did. She's stronger than I ever was." Michael promised he would pass along the message. They talked for a while longer about practical things. Rachel's appeals process, Emily's college plans, Robert's ongoing efforts to establish a foundation in Margaret's memory. It was strange, having a normal conversation with the woman who'd caused so much pain, but it was also necessary. Emily needed to see that her parents could interact civilly, that the toxicity of their past didn't have to poison her future when visiting hours ended. Michael drove to the office he now shared with Robert in downtown Boston. Hale Turner Investments occupied the top floor of a gleaming office building, with views of the harbor that reminded him daily of how much his life had changed. He found Robert in the conference room, reviewing proposals for the Margaret Hale Foundation for Cancer Research. They'd established it 6 months after the trial, using money from Margaret's estate that had been frozen during the investigation. It felt like the right way to honor her memory, turning her husband's grief and guilt into something that might help other families facing similar battles. "How did it go?" Robert asked, looking up from the stack of grant applications. "Better than expected. She seems to be making real progress in therapy. I think Emily will be pleased." Robert nodded. In the year since Rachel's arrest, he and Michael had developed an unlikely friendship based on their shared love for Emily and their mutual need to heal from Rachel's betrayal. They'd both been victims of her manipulation, and they'd found strength in supporting each other through the aftermath. "Emily called this morning," Robert said. "She wanted to know if we'd both be free for dinner Sunday. Apparently she has something she wants to discuss with us." Michael smiled. Emily had a tendency to treat important conversations like business meetings, complete with agendas and action items. It was endearing and slightly intimidating at the same time. "Any idea what it's about?" "I suspect it has to do with the foundation. She's been researching trauma therapy programs, and I think she wants to propose expanding our mission beyond cancer research." They worked together for another hour, reviewing financial reports and discussing investment strategies. It was comfortable, professional, the kind of partnership Michael had never imagined possible with the man his ex-wife had planned to murder. As the sun set over Boston Harbor, Michael reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A year ago, he'd been a lonely man mourning a wife and daughter he thought were dead. Now he was building a new kind of family with the same daughter, and the man who'd raised her, while the woman who'd caused it all served her sentence for murder. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was real in a way his marriage to Rachel never had been. Built on truth instead of lies, cooperation instead of manipulation, love that respected rather than controlled. Sunday dinner at Emily's apartment was a weekly tradition now, the three of them gathering to share a meal and catch up on their lives. Emily cooked, usually something elaborate she'd learned from a YouTube video, while Michael and Robert argued good-naturedly about everything from politics to sports to investment strategies. "You know," Emily had said during one of these dinners, "most people don't get to choose their family. But we do. We get to decide what kind of relationships we want to have, what kind of people we want to be together." She was right. Of course, Emily was almost always right about things like that. They were choosing each other. Daily, deliberately, building something new from the wreckage of Rachel's schemes. As Michael drove home that evening, he thought about the letter Emily had written to Rachel after the trial. She'd shown it to him before sending it, and one line had stuck with him. "Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go of the need to control the people you care about. I hope someday you'll understand that." Rachel was learning to understand it. Slowly, painfully, and maybe that was enough. Maybe love could survive betrayal, murder, and a decade of lies. Not the same love, not the naive trust they'd started with, but something deeper and more honest. Something worth building a family on, one difficult conversation at a time. As he'd told Rachel earlier that day, the truth could be a kind of poison, destroying everything you thought you knew about your life. But it could also be medicine, painful, but ultimately healing. The truth, Michael had learned, always found a way home.